Hey, Kelsie.
Hey, Brooke.
Want to tell everyone what's happening in this episode?
This episode is a short introduction to what we're about and why good teachers might fail to teach women's history.
History is no longer just a chronicle of kings and statesmen, of people who wielded power, but of ordinary women and men engaged in manifold tasks. Women's history is an assertion that women have a history. Toshiko Kishida. There could be as many histories as there are women to write them. Any women's history therefore has to be alert to the blanks, the omissions, and half-truths. Rosalind Miles. When it comes to silencing women, Western culture has thousands of years of practice. Mary Beard. Hello, and welcome to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%, the podcast that explores what happened to the women in history class. Now, here's your host, Kelsie Brooke Eckert, and her partner in crime, Brooke Nina Sullivan.
Women existed in history and contributed to it in diverse ways, but our history education tends to only celebrate those women who ventured into the man's world and not women who contributed to our economy and cultures. Traditional survey history courses, like those taught in high school, barely discuss women and gender. Hello, everybody. I'm grateful you've tuned in for our inaugural episode of Remedial Herstory, the other 50%. My name is Kelsie Brooke Eckert. I go by she, her, and I am a highly qualified, award-winning history teacher. I am very good at what I do, but I also absolutely fail to teach intersectional women's history. That failure has brought me to this moment. I'm joined here by my partner in crime, friend, businesswoman, feminist, and non-history teacher extraordinaire, Brooke Nina Sullivan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kelsie, for inviting me. It's incredible what you're doing, but I think people definitely should know how you asked me to be part of this.
Absolutely.
I was just thinking about how ridiculous it was, but more or less, I'm obsessed with Kelsie as a history teacher. I think she does such amazing work and absolutely signed on when she asked me to say yes, but she asked me to say yes when we were skinny dipping. And I was like, I'm feeling really vulnerable right now. I'll say yes.
So I bullied you. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, no. Let's backtrack here. So all of a sudden I get this text on a Sunday afternoon. What are you doing when your kids go to bed and get wine and a headlamp? I was like, well, yes, whatever that is.
Whatever that is, we're doing it.
I 100% agree, and I don't care if we're sitting in anywhere ridiculous, I'm in. And so I met Kelsie at a rando spot, jumped in a car with 3 other women I've never met before, and drove out to, what is it called? It was Chamberlain Reynolds or something on Squam Lake. I'd never been there before. All of a sudden we get there and it's dumping buckets of water. So I'm like, well, I guess we're just going to sit in this car. And then everyone starts cracking open drinks. I was like, this is the best group of women I've ever met in my life. I don't know them. This is awesome. It was our friend Rachel's birthday who was there. And everyone's just drinking wine. We're all new moms, which was kind of awesome.
Yeah.
And, having a great time and just chit-chatting in the car until the rain stopped so we could go swimming, and then obviously ventured through the dark woods.
Yeah.
Headlamps on. And Kelsey's like, so I have this idea. I'm like, okay.
I'm going to make a podcast. You should join me.
Sounds like a great idea, Kels. I'm in. So, hence, I'm here, but I also would follow Kelsie into dark
Yeah, I feel like this says a lot about your character.
Maybe I'm very gullible. I don't really know, but I'm all in for whatever Kelsie's up to. So that's me. But a little bit about my background. I'm from New England. I'm a total feminist. I'm a mom of 2. I am a crazy worker and love my job, which we can maybe get into more in later days. But I also am obsessed with knowing how women fit into history. So I'm also here to learn and ask Kelsie a zillion and one question.
And I am just so grateful that you were down to join me on this venture.
I feel like if you asked me to do anything, I would have been like, yeah, no.
Well, I am here because I am a history teacher, and I know that I have failed to teach women's history. And Brooke and I both, grew up in the same era, went to the same sort of history classes, and both of us are, and probably everyone listening to this podcast is ignorant about women's history, and that's why what unites us all. Yep. The compelling story that brought me to this moment was I was in Washington, D.C., and
wait, what year is this?
I think it's like 2015.
Okay, so their cell phone, these kids are, into technology. They are trying to pay attention on a field trip.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, these are like the best of the best kids that are with me.
These are the dream team,
Dream team.
They don't care about Instagram.
No. Although maybe they do. I don't know. So I have a minute away from the kids, and I pop into the bookstore that's down, underneath the museum. And when I go into a bookstore, what I do is I go to the history section, and I pan for books that are either by or about women. And
this is my new favorite habit that I'm adopting. I'm sorry, stop talking to me. Where's your female books?
It's hard and it's depressing, and it's nowhere near 50%. And that year, I don't remember exactly how many I found, but there were very few. The one book that did stand out to me and that I bought was a book called America's Women: 400 Years of Dolls, Drudges, Helpmates, and Heroines by Gail Collins. It's a survey of American history, but it's only about America's women. And
it's like such a provoking title, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, get in here, we've got
drudges. Yeah. So I bought the book and immediately started reading it. I'm like sitting out on the mall, in DC, just devouring this book. And
the kids are safe with it.
The kids are safe, yeah, I'm sure.
Just painting pictures of safety.
Yeah, okay. They're safe.
Well entertained reading educational
stories. I think we were like throwing a frisbee or something. It's fine.
Right.
And I'm reading this book, and I bought the book thinking like, oh, I teach history, I got this. Like who are they gonna put in here? It's like Susan B. Anthony.
Well, and especially
I know
like
her.
You're a natural feminist, you're in.
Yeah, and I probably already know these things, and as I'm reading, I'm realizing I literally know nothing. I don't know. I know fractions of the names of women that are being mentioned. I don't know. She does such a good job of talking about the women's sphere, which is not politics, not economics, not military. And so I'm like, oh my gosh.
Your mind is blown.
I'm like, these are themes that I don't even can think about.
Yeah.
And so, that began a many-year journey into researching women's history further. And so the compelling question that we're pursuing with this podcast is, why are women left out, and how the heck do we put them back in?
Yes! Oh my gosh.
The answers to this question are obviously many. And so and actually at one point I got so confused. I made this web diagram with women aren't in history class in the middle.
I could just see you string on the wall.
Yeah.
Red dots connecting.
Like Sherlock Holmes style.
Tell me why.
Why is this happening? Yeah, I mean probably nerd.
We're here for female nerds.
Yeah. And there are many answers to this question, and it's not a very easy thing to explain because it's not as simple. There's this classicist historian, Mary Beard. She talks about it's all sexist. That's not a good answer. She says that's a
blanket
oversimplification of what's going on.
Big time. There's way too much that happened through history that you can just say, oh, sexism was a thing. It's or did women not feel there's so many reasons. It's why isn't a woman present in this moment?
Yeah.
Other than that.
Correct.
All right, we're in.
So if you're listening to this, what you need is somebody who actually works in a public school. There are lots of scholars, there are lots of academics, there are lots of podcasts talking about women's history, and they've been doing this for decades. But the problem is that despite all that really great work, it's not trickling down to those of us that are on the front lines.
Okay, and so you're saying public versus private.
Probably private school too, but public schools present a really unique environment where you have
set curricula.
Set curricula. You've got state standards to meet. You have communities that you are responsible to. But you also have don't know if I'm wrong in saying this, but I think you have more diverse students in the room, both like socioeconomically, racially, different classes. Private schools can sometimes be gendered, and so that is a problem.
Yeah.
That would create a unique perspective. But certainly private schools could benefit from this dialogue as well. I think another piece, and the people that we're speaking to here are anybody, really, who's embarrassed to admit how little they know about women's history.
Yeah, like, I'm thinking of this personally, too. Like, I'm not a teacher, but this is interesting to me in the fact that these are things that I didn't know about, and I want to make sure that I'm aware and have some consciousness around so that it's also something that I know for the future and also to tell other people. And I'm, thinking about raising 2 children that I want to make sure that this is part of their curriculum and maybe challenge the system that's in the town that I live in.
Absolutely. And I think parents have a really important role to play in that. Parents, this could be a whole podcast, but parents have an absolute role in their child's education, and you can petition schools to change curriculum.
Oh my gosh. So, activist mom, look out.
Yeah, here she comes.
Oh, scary days. Okay.
So our name, Remedial Herstory, which is really hard to say.
I always skip over remedial. I feel like I need like a hot second. My tongue doesn't work that way. But Herstory, I got it.
Yes. It comes from a comment that Gloria Steinem made in her essay Words and Change that you can find in her book of essays called Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions. She was talking about how in the 1970s, because women were so left out of history curriculum, the colleges and universities began creating all of these different college majors for like African American studies, Indigenous people studies, and women's studies. And she said that, these are like embarrassing majors essentially because they're just basically creating remedial study. Like your education has been so terrible. Like here, let's teach you what you didn't learn.
It's like Post-it note learning. Like here's one, here's another.
Yeah. So that's what we have. We have Remedial Herstory. We're trying to fill that gap.
Should we cheers to Gloria?
Cheers to Gloria. Clink. So this podcast is for everyone who has felt that their education was insufficient, but specifically, I want to speak to social studies educators and give you resources, ideas, and strategies to bring into your classroom tomorrow. You could do anything that we're talking about tomorrow. We're going to talk about things that we all learned in school, things that are, hot button topics like World War I, World War II, right? These are things that everybody learned about.
Everyone covers these.
Everybody covers them, but we want to look at them from a feminine or female perspective. In the first episode, for example, we're going to talk about some women's historians that are not talked about and should be on par with other people of the American Revolution era.
Yeah.
So we'll get into those and look at their perspectives on the American Revolution. In addition, though, we also want to challenge educators to think about units of study that are not currently included in your curriculum. I teach history, so I know that I have topics and units that are under the theme of economics and labor rights and all those things and wars, and I make sure that we touch on Vietnam, okay. But
you also probably too, like, you're relatively like newer in your career as far as like you can still manipulate your stuff. Like you don't pull out, okay, it's March, this is what I'm teaching in March.
This is what we teach, right?
Like you challenge yourself to change your curriculum
regularly.
Yeah, so that it's always fresh and it's new when you're developing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it too. Like, as teachers, you can probably go pretty far in your career, just plug and play a little bit of like creating it once, feeling like, oh, I'll change it a little bit, but then doing the same thing year after year.
Yeah.
So this is also challenging people to change up what they're doing.
Absolutely. And, I mean, we have to be honest that in order to really teach women's history, you're going to have to include themes and topics that aren't included before. And so some of those things you have to look at, okay, what is going on in an average woman's life in 1700, and what does that mean? What do I need to be including in order to have her story, her life part of the narrative. And so this will include things like childbirth, child rearing, sex, sexuality, scandals, marriage, things that dominate the lives
This
of...
podcast just got so much better.
Because we're talking about sex, is that...
Maybe.
Okay.
Or, yeah, no, childbirth is what I was talking about.
Oh, yeah, childbirth. Yeah.
Super sexy topic.
Super sexy. I think that also we need to... there is room to include topics like sexual violence, sexual assault in curriculums that we're already teaching. And here's a really good example, and we'll get into this more deeply in a different podcast, but the Mongol Empire, as they came across Eurasia, conquering town after town after town, they what they did was when people surrendered, they killed all the men, took all the tradespeople and women as slaves, and moved on.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah. And it's horrible. And that's what I just said is exactly what's in the super progressive textbook that I have. They took all the women as slaves. What kind of slaves are we talking about?
Yeah.
And what do we mean when we say that? And what we actually mean when we say that is we mean rape.
Yeah.
And that word isn't used in a high school history textbook when we talk about the Mongol Empire, and that's really problematic because
it doesn't paint an accurate photo. Yeah,
it lies about what's really going on for women.
Well, and also it doesn't speak to the real issue that there is that power struggle for women in that time period, and rape is a huge part of that culture.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
that's a problem.
They've also done like recent studies that show just how expansive the Mongol rape was. And they can trace huge percentages of the modern population of Eurasia to Genghis Khan.
Whoa.
Meaning he fathered so many people because of rape that, right, like we can trace people's ancestry to him. So... Right, we've got to talk about rape. Like that's a part of the success of the Mongol Empire.
Slaves weren't complicit to this happening to them.
Right. So, I guess what I want to challenge people to do is be accurate about women's history and include words that might be scary to talk about. And I do teach high school history, and I should probably make that clear. And obviously, someone who teaches like 5th grade should probably,
Maybe don't introduce rape at it.
Yeah, rape, maybe you could just say, like, other words. They were mean to women.
Non-consensual.
Yeah, that's definitely vocabulary appropriate to a 5th
I'm like,
grader.
where's my English major brain? I'm like, non-consensual, forced upon.
Yes.
Not equal.
Not equal. Here are synonyms.
Come to me for all the synonyms. So that's okay.
Yeah.
I think I just said cinnamon.
Cinnamon.
It's good.
Yeah,
We're here
good.
for the cinnamon.
Yeah. The best way that the easiest way that you can include women's voices is actually to do current practice in social studies ed, which is to follow the inquiry model. And that's what I do. I am a board member for the New Hampshire Council for the Social Studies, and I have used that position, and the New Hampshire Council for the Social Studies has promoted the new C3, well, I mean new relatively, but C3 education standards.
So if you're a teacher, this is like well
you
known
know
to you.
these
Yeah.
words.
Okay.
Yeah. And basically the National Council for Social Studies funded the development of this social studies curriculum.
Okay.
And the inquiry model is really simple. Basically, you instead of like, okay, we're going to talk about the Civil War and we're going to start in 1850 and look at the buildup and then da-da-da-da-da. And it's sort of like content-driven. The C3 standards are inquiry-driven. And so inquiry meaning questions. And so you and the students develop questions that are compelling. And compelling means it's
like challenging them.
Challenging them, but it's also current.
Okay.
So
it doesn't have like a current lens on it.
It should be something that is still significant and important today.
Yeah.
Like the Civil War is old school, but what's not old school is whether or not the Civil War actually reformed American society. Did it fix it, right?
Yeah.
Like racism, that's over, right?
Probably not.
Probably not. So that would be a compelling topic to investigate the Civil War, like, through that lens. So the inquiry model, what it wants is it wants kids to be the historians. It wants kids to go to the primary source material themselves and draw the conclusions instead of having a textbook that tells you that Mongol women were,
yeah, or even the teacher saying, this is my thought, and you should adopt it as truth.
Yeah. Yeah, and the inquiry model is really amazing, and it basically is pushing kids to look at the source material themselves.
Be critical thinkers.
Be critical thinkers, exactly.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole point of going forward you're essentially preparing a student not only for college, but also for life in general. There should always be a question. Is this accurate? Is this factual? And is what I'm getting what I need to be getting? Should I go check multiple resources? Like, you're trying to challenge them as a citizen to be a compelling citizen.
Yeah.
So I think that's a perfect model to get them prepared for that.
Yeah, and engaged. Yeah, we want them to participate and be a part of this society. We want them to be workers that ask good questions to their boss.
Don't just take it as, so I should just kill these people? This is what we're doing now?
Yeah, okay, so Genghis Khan did that. Like, right, think about this. Is this somebody, ask good questions. And so this model really builds that. And for every episode, one of the things that I want to do is, as I'm introducing women and ideas or concepts to everybody, provide you with the primary source material that you could use in your classroom tomorrow. I want you to be able, when possible, we will be creating C3 curriculum that you can utilize.
That's incredible. That people can just go to your site and get this information.
Yeah, and so this will all be on our website, which is remedialherstory.com.
Not gov or org.
Not those.
We're comms.
We're comms. Yeah, exactly.
We're also businesswomen here. We're calm.
We're calm. Yeah. So when I started this sort of quest 5 years ago, I went on, my Apple Podcast app and searched for women's history to see what was there. And
tell us what you find.
Nothing. Nada. Today, though, if you do that, you will actually find a lot of different podcasts.
Good.
And they're awesome. And
shout out.
Yeah. And I follow all of them. I'm huge fans of everybody. And I think that what makes this podcast a little bit different than the things that are already out there is we will talk about women and their experiences and their stories in this podcast. But the podcasts that highlight women in history, I call that pop-up history. And as a history teacher, pop-up history is really hard because when you learn about a woman that exists in history, you also need to know, where does she fit in my curriculum?
Okay. So those podcasts are more or less giving you an idea of a woman in that space and time, but not exactly how she's affected by the event that you're discussing.
Well, it's like, okay, there's a cool anecdote, but does she fit in World War I? Because that's the unit I'm on tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and a good example, the Einsteins are a really cool example. His wife, Mileva, is... really cool. She helped co-write the theory of relativity, and she's incredible. And I listened.
I'm sorry, what is her name? We need to take a pause.
Yeah, Mrs. Einstein. Okay, in her time, she's not mentioned, even though she helped co-write this. He, wins all the awards and gets all those things, and it's great. And I heard a podcast about this, and I was mind blown about her story. And I said, okay, well, here's this woman who did all these profound things. She's incredible. How do I put her into history class? Yeah,
because Einstein's what, 40s, 50s, 60s?
Yeah.
Like, where does she
fit? And I literally...
What's her name, Minerva?
Mileva.
Mileva.
I literally mentioned Einstein, I think, once in my classes, only really to say... he helped the United States start the Manhattan Project.
Yeah, and relatively important person, incredibly smart man, supported by a genius woman.
A genius woman. This is a great anecdote that I learned. He, at one point, said, I love my wife. She does all my math for me. It's just like, come on.
I need a t-shirt that says that.
Yeah.
I'm going to write down all of our t-shirt ideas.
From Einstein, I know. Oh, so we want to do pop-up history. We want to leave people with those anecdotes and cool
I
ideas.
feel like very educated on this person now.
Yeah.
But how does it fit?
But how does it fit and where do we put her? And so we want to be that bridge that says, okay, here are the anecdotes, here are the details, these are the primary sources, this is where she fits in your class. This is where she fits in the historical or world narrative.
Yeah.
In the national narrative. And we need to be that bridge to help teachers place these women into the themes that already exist in our classroom and also guide teachers into new themes to explore.
Awesome.
So I've read a lot of books at this point, and one of the things that cracks me up about books related to women's history is they almost always have some sort of caveat or disclaimer built into their preface or their introduction.
Like what?
So here's a good example. So Mary Ritter Beard said that she was putting emphasis, and perhaps too much, like she was worried maybe I'm putting too much emphasis on women in history where they don't...
Do not apologize.
She was apologetic. Rosalind Miles said that women's history is full of all these blanks, and so I might have to guess here or there or infer about what women thought, and sorry if I'm wrong.
Are you an educated woman guessing? Then you just did what a man does. Good for you.
So I do want to read Gail Collins's, because her sort of apology at the beginning is basically that women's history is contradictory, and that can be problematic. And so hers, from the book that I mentioned, America's Women, hers is interesting, and she talks about how confusing women's history is. She says that America, she says, this was a country, after all, where some 19th century females became famous for writing books about why women had to stay out of the public eye, while others traveled all around the country lecturing about how women should never leave the home. Southern matriarchs aspired to the image of the helpless female, but they ran the plantations while their husbands went to Congress or luxuriated at the spa. Pioneer women rode side saddle and wore gloves to protect their soft hands, then crawled up the side of a mountain with a newborn baby in one arm. Everyone believed unmarried women were obliged to stay home with their children, while everybody bought factory goods produced by poor working mothers made from cotton picked by female slaves. And so
The dichotomies.
Right? And so there are going to be contradictions. That's what she says. We're not going to summarize all women in this
How could you?
book. Right.
Women rock, and there's so much complexity.
Absolutely. There's complexity here. So we probably should also put out our disclaimer, though.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Well, let's do it.
Let's do it. Which is, we are bridging a gap between scholars and educators. And so the obvious disclaimer here is that we didn't learn this history in school. And
Yes.
we're doing our own research, and we're doing our best to present women's history. And we are probably going to make errors in that process.
I'll make all the errors.
Oh, okay. You'll take it for the team.
It'll just more than likely me. So if you have like a correction spot, just at Brooke.
At Brooke, please correct. No. I think that's the humility that everybody who ventures into women's history has to have, which is that this hasn't been done before. It is new within the last few decades, and the work that is being done, people are challenging works that women are writing about women's history, and that's making it evolve and become better, and that's awesome.
Like, thankful so much for them for doing the work and like trying to be in a space that wasn't there. It's like, okay, let's lean into this and help them out, and then also reach out a hand and lift them up. It's like, here we go.
Absolutely. So each podcast that we create, you are going to have one reason why women were left out of the curriculum that we learned in school. And you're also going to get something that you should know about and possibly be able to teach tomorrow. We're going to post related educational materials to our website, remedialherstory.com. And we hope that you will stay with us as we fill the gaps in what the average person knows about women's history and perspective, and attempt to answer why they weren't included. You ready, Brooke?
Teach me, Kels. us.
All right, we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Thanks so much for listening to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts to bring more voices to the conversation. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.